Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of fish growing on trees. We have Judd Kratzer, who is a fisheries biologist with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's been with the department about 17 years. He loves fishing, loves to talk about fish and share how the forests matter to the fish in our streams. So I'm going to turn it over to Judd and let him just go on. A few housekeeping notes. Please type your questions into the chat. I will relay those to Judd either in the middle or at the end, depending on how things are going. And we can have a little back and forth with questions at the end if more pop up. Please keep yourself muted so that we don't have any background noise. You're welcome to have your cameras on or off. That's entirely up to you. And I think that covers just about everything. So with that, go ahead, Judd.
Yep, all right. I'm just going to get my presentation up. Oh. Okay, there. Can you see that, Lisa?
Yep, and it's in presentation mode. You should be all set.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, thank you. Good noon, everyone. Honored to be able to share this with you. Yeah, I like especially being able to, I like talking about this topic any chance I get, but especially with Vermont coverage because this is, you know, speaking to landowners that want to do the right thing with their lands and with their forests and their wildlife and even the water on your lands is great, and the kind of audience that I can get the most bang for the buck, I think, by sharing these things. So thank you for tuning in. So yeah, I mean, we use the title "Fish Grow on Trees" to really kind of get your attention. If you haven't heard that before, I mean, I like to start with this because it really doesn't make sense to begin with. But one of my goals by the end of this presentation is to help you understand why we at the department say that fish grow on trees, and hopefully have you even agree with me on that. But before we get to that, I just want to give some background on some of the fish we have in this state. We have about 90 species. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but we like to divide them into two main categories: cold water fish and warm water fish. And as the name implies, that's based on the water temperature that they prefer. There's some differences in the habitat that come along with that as well. But I'm just going to, quickly go through some of these. We really need to start with brook trout. They're the state cold water fish. They're the fish that we know our anglers, that's their favorite fish, based on our statewide surveys. And these fish are in just about every small cold stream throughout the state, naturally reproducing. The Champlain Valley is the exception. That's kind of low down. The streams are a little bit warmer there. But just about every other little small cold stream, even streams that you might think would be too small for fish, we will often find at least small brook trout in them. And that's a good thing. Brook trout are indicators of that we have cold water, that we have clean water, and that we have good habitat. So they're a good indicator species, as well as just being popular with anglers and just being a beautiful fish to look at. We also have non-native trout, brown trout there on the top, rainbow trout on the bottom. These are naturally reproducing in a lot of our streams as well. They tend to be lower down and a little bit bigger, warmer streams because they tolerate a little bit warmer water, and they can tolerate a little poorer habitat than brook trout. And these are also popular with our anglers as well, but they still do need good habitat and cold water. So, if they're there, that's a good sign as well. We also have suckers. The two species that we have throughout most of the state are the long-nosed sucker there on the top, white sucker on the bottom. Long-nosed suckers tend to prefer a little bit colder water. White suckers are very abundant, especially in our kind of like medium-sized to larger rivers, also in a lot of our lakes and streams as well, or sorry, lakes and ponds. We have dace, that's black nose dace on the top, long nose dace on the bottom. These are often in a lot of our uh, cold streams. Slimy sculpin, this is a really neat fish that most people never see, but they're in a lot of our trout streams. You don't see them because, well, they only get, usually they're only about 3 inches long, very cryptic, and it's very rare to catch one of these fishing. So yeah, unless you're really looking for them, you're probably not going to see them. But they also are a good indication of good water quality because they like to live kind of in the cracks in the rock. So if you have nice, clean stream bed, that's good for them. Burbot, this is another fish a lot of people never see unless you're actually fishing for them. They're nocturnal. As you can see, they kind of look like an eel, but they're actually the only fully freshwater member of the cod family. And we have them in some of our streams and also some of our lakes. Um, but they get bigger in the lakes. Don't get real big in our streams. But again, they prefer a little bit warmer water than a trout. But now getting into the warm water fish, chain pickerel is a very common one throughout the state. And the warm water fish that I'm going to talk about are mostly found in our big rivers. So say like the lower Missisquoi, the lower Winooski, the Connecticut River, or in lakes and ponds, because those are the places that have the warmer water typically. So for most landowners, if you have water on your property, it's probably going to be a small stream, so you're more likely to have the cold water fish. But these warm water fish could be around. There's the larger cousin of the chain pickerel, the northern pike. And then we've got some smaller fish like rock bass, pumpkin seeds, yellow perch. If you cast a worm under a bobber out into a lake or pond, you're probably going to get one of these, especially pumpkin seeds and perch. We also have smallmouth bass and largemouth bass, which I didn't include. And then here's just walleye. And by the way, this is the state warm water fish there's only 2 states in the nation that have a cold water fish and a warm water fish, and we're one of them. The other is Georgia. So another little bit of trivia for you there. Um, and then lots of minnows that fit into the warm water category. And yeah, so anyway, of all these fish that I talked about, there's some similarities in their life cycle. So fish eggs, all the species that we have in Vermont, their eggs are fertilized externally. So the eggs are laid by the female, the milt is released by the males, they're fertilized outside of those fish. But then those eggs, for a lot of our species, they end up in or on rocks or gravel. Some of them stick to vegetation. Some of the warm water species do that. But a lot of them are dependent on some kind of clean kind of lake or stream bottom for their eggs to incubate. And then the fry hatch out using energy from those eggs to begin with, and then they will start eating and grow and get to adulthood and repeat that cycle. But the reason I start with that life cycle is because what I'm going to get into next is just talk about what fish need. So some really basic fish biology. And it doesn't get too much more basic than that fish need water. We all know that. And this usually isn't an issue in Vermont. We get a lot of rain here, especially last year. And we don't have much irrigation going on. So we typically don't have people drawing enough water out to really cause a problem for fish. The one place where we do potentially see it would be in hydropower situations. So, if you want to make electricity from a river, you get the most power by putting that whole river through your turbines, right? But if you do that, you're putting that water through your powerhouse, through your turbines, and then drying up a portion of the river. So this is like the main place where we are might have this, and our department and other partners are involved in regulating these kind of things so that that doesn't happen. But fish need spawning habitat. I talked about that a little bit already. And as I said, a lot of our fish spawn on rock or gravel. Here's some trout that are spawning on some gravel substrate. These are some white suckers that came out of Crystal Lake up in Barton, and they ran up into a small tributary where they are spawning on the gravel and rocks there. Here's some rainbow smelt, which are in some of our deep, cold lakes. And sometimes they will spawn on the lake shore, but they're most noted for going up into small streams and spawning on the rocks in the lower ends of those streams. But so yeah, some of these, so smelt, for example, their eggs actually attach to the tops of the rocks. But with a lot of species, the eggs are getting kind of down into the gravel where they're protected, especially with the trout. So they're protected from predators. They're protected if the water comes up or down, if they're kind of down in that gravel. But what you need to have, those eggs are alive and they're incubating. So they need fresh water coming in, bringing oxygen, carrying away waste products. So we need that gravel to be clean. If that gets filled with sediment, sand, silt, that kind of thing, it can basically block the water and the oxygen from coming through, and those eggs could suffocate. So they need, not only do they need spawning habitat, but they need clean spawning habitat. Fish need cover. In this picture, here's a brown trout, and you might be able to notice that that mark there behind the head where a bird tried to grab this fish. Fish need cover because they have predators. So they need a place to hide, and that could be rocks. Here's a juvenile Atlantic salmon hiding in some rocks, smallmouth bass under some rocks. Wood in streams is really great habitat, and I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about wood later. But those are good places for fish to hide. Here's some guys adding wood actually to the Battenkill River as cover for fish. Vegetation, this is usually more important in lakes and ponds. There's some species that are especially well adapted to this, like chain pickerel. There's one in the picture there if you can see it. Undercut banks, rivers and streams, there's erosion as part of the process, natural process, sometimes exacerbated by our activities. But if you've got some good roots in the soil on your stream bank, the stream can sometimes cut underneath that bank and leave this basically a roof, an undercut that fish can hide under. Deep pools are important. If you're on a river and you can't see to the bottom of the pool, well, there's a good chance a bird can't see that far down either. And so fish can be protected in those deep water areas. And then also surface turbulence, whether it's riffles or white water, sometimes a boulder or a tree or something like that in the water can create these riffles that make it hard to see down through for us and for predators. And so that can provide cover for fish as well. All right, so I talked about what fish need. Now we're going to finally get back to this idea that fish grow on trees. And the reason I say that is for 4 reasons. Trees provide cold water, they provide clean water, they provide habitat, and they provide food. So now I'm going to walk through each of these. So first, trees provide cold water. I think we all understand this. Trees provide shade. So that stream on the left there, that's a small stream, well protected with trees, and that probably doesn't have much sunlight hitting that stream most of the summer. Helps it stay cool. On the right, we've got a little bit bigger stream. So probably getting a little more sun exposure, but still those trees are helping to shade and keep it cool. In contrast, here's a stream that does not have very good shade, and the sun just beats on that river all day and definitely makes that thing warmer, which is not a good thing for our cold water species. In contrast, this looking up from a small stream at the canopy, again, just showing what the shade might, how it would block the sun. One thing we often don't think about so much, though, is that trees can also not just help stay cool in the summer, but can actually keep it a little bit warmer in the winter, which is actually a hard time for our fish to survive in, especially in our small streams. Because if you have ice forming right to the bottom, those that definitely changes the flow and limits the places that they can live. But trees can help, break up the wind, slow things down, maybe catch some snow, just add just a little bit of insulation that can help it stay just a little bit warmer. That can be helpful, especially in these small streams, and helping cold water fish like brook trout, but also things like spring salamanders, which live in some of these small cold streams as well. Even in streams that might be too steep or too small for brook trout, you might have salamanders, which need cold water, and so the trees benefit them as well. Here's just an example. The line in blue there is from a small stream that has good shade. The stream in red, or the river in red, is a larger stream with not very good shade. And brook trout, they really prefer water temperatures below about 68 degrees. They'll really start to not look really good at about 72, and they really can't survive beyond 74 degrees. So that stream that's in blue there, that's ideal. That's a really good temperature for brook trout. They could not survive in that red stream. At least in the summer, they might be able to survive there part of the year, but they definitely cannot survive there through the summer. But on these larger rivers, here's an example from the Winooski River. There's a bunch of fish that are stacked up at the mouth of a small cold stream that's coming in. The Winooski's big, it gets warm, hard to shade a river that size, but this small stream that's coming in does have good shade, and so it's providing some cold water that helps these fish get through the summer. So even if just to benefit those larger rivers, you might not be able to shade them all, but just having those tributaries coming in shaded is really important. And that comes from the trees. All right, we also say that fish grow on trees because they help provide clean water. They help to provide, help to hold our stream banks together, which limits some of the sedimentation coming in. They also help to filter runoff that's coming in. So whether it's pulling out pollutants or sediment, because if too much sediment is a bad thing. It can cause what we call embeddedness. So a lot of some of the important species in our streams, like the insects and also the incubating eggs and the baby fish, are living in and under the rocks. At least that's where they prefer to be. So if they're going to be under those rocks, they need water moving through. And so if those rocks are embedded because there's so much sand and silt, that can suffocate those insects and those incubating eggs and small fish. So yeah, that's why we want to keep our streams clean, keep the sediment out. Again, it could ruin their spawning habitat. Here's some nice clean gravel with some trout spawning. If that's covered in sand and silt, they really can't spawn there successfully. In extreme cases, you could have direct mortality from sedimentation. That's probably pretty rare, but a lot of sediment, excessive amounts of sediment, can at least damage their gills, which are, that's where they're getting in their oxygen, getting rid of their carbon dioxide. Water has to flow right over those things, and they're very delicate. So too much sediment can damage those gills and impact their health, if not kill them. So having good trees, vegetation on our banks is important for keeping our water clean and limiting sedimentation. We say that fish grow in trees because they provide habitat, and specifically I'm talking about trees that fall into the stream, which is a natural process that has been going on long before we were here. We had these big old trees that would eventually die, and some of them would fall into the streams. And today we don't think about wood in streams as much because we're used to not seeing it. But our streams looked a lot more like this, or actually had a lot more wood in them in the past. And if you're an angler, you know that that's a good place. What I'm looking at there on the right is a good place to cast for brook trout. That wood there is providing overhead cover. It's created this deep hole, and that's what they love. But good habitat, um, it for fish is diverse. There's shallow water, deep water, fast, slow. It's complex. We humans like to think in terms of drainage ditches, something that's nice and straight. But really in nature, whether it's in the forest or in the streams, good habitat is complex and it's messy. And I think probably you may have heard the term messes or the phrase messes best at other Vermont coverage trainings, even talking about the forest. But that's the same thing is true in our rivers. People might look at that and think that's ugly or dangerous. And I have had people think that wood in streams is actually bad for fish habitat, but that's actually excellent fish habitat, even though it might not meet our human aesthetic. And then we say that fish grow on trees because they provide food. So just notice in that picture there, these are actually some trees that we purposely dropped into the stream, but notice all that leaf litter there that's piled up on the upstream side of that tree. That's important because of what is called the river continuum concept, which is what I'm showing here. So on the left, we start out, the numbers there are the stream order. So at the upper end are our small headwater streams, which by the way is most of the streams that we have in Vermont would fit into that category. Headwater streams. Actually, that's true just about every watershed. The majority of the watershed is made up in these small headwater streams. And then as you move downstream, you're getting to bigger, like middle-sized rivers. And then at the bottom there, you've got maybe something like the Connecticut River or the lower Missisquoi. So what this is showing is that the food web changes as you move from the top to the bottom. And so I pulled out on the right there those headwater streams, which is most of what we have in Vermont. And in those small streams, well, I mean, in any ecosystem, in any food web, the base of the food web are the primary producers. So that and that's generally organisms, plants, usually plants that are photosynthesizing because they're getting their energy from the sun. And then all the animals, some of them are eating those plants directly, and then there's predators eating those animals. So you got to start somewhere. It starts with the sun. Well, in these small cold streams, you can see there's not many grazers. Grazers are the insects that eat the algae on the rocks. Well, algae is a plant that needs sun. There's not many grazers up there because these streams are shaded because of the trees, which is the way it should be. So the photosynthesis is happening in the forest, and that means that the base of the food web is actually the leaves and sticks and things like that that fall in from the forest. And that's why we have the shredders there. They're the insects that eat the leaves and the fungi that are growing on the leaves. And they break it up into smaller pieces for the insects called the collectors. And all of these insects are what the fish eat. So very directly here, very directly, the trees are feeding the insects, but then indirectly, those trees are feeding the fish because the fish are eating the insects. So that's why we say fish grow on trees, because they provide cold water, clean water, habitat, and food. All right, and if you're still not convinced, just share this study that we did back in 2009 and 2011, where we sampled brook trout populations at a little over 30 sites in northeastern Vermont, and at those same sites we monitored water temperature and we looked at water chemistry, several aspects of water chemistry. We looked at different habitat features, a lot of different factors that we looked at to see what factors were most related to brook trout abundance. And we found that the two most important factors were the water temperature, which wasn't surprising because we know that brook trout need cold water. But the second most important factor was the amount of large woody material, basically trees that had fallen into the stream. Those were our two most important factors in determining how many brook trout we had. In light of that, we actually started doing strategic wood addition. And what this is, I explain it by going backwards through the title. It's an addition because we are adding something. What we're adding is wood. That wood actually comes from the streamside forest. We're using chainsaws to drop them in. But it's also strategic because we put a lot of thought and planning into deciding what streams we're going to work on and which trees we're going to take, which we're going to leave, and the ones that we're going to drop in, how are we going to get them, position them so that they are going to be most functional and beneficial. Just to give some examples, here's a small stream with not very big trees that we put into it, but on a small stream, you don't really need very big trees, and those are going to stay. They can't really go very far when even if the water comes up because they're going to hit something. Here's a little bit bigger tree on a small stream, just getting a little bit bigger. This is what they look like basically the first fall after. I'll show some more pictures later that show what they look like later. We also do hand placement, so cutting trees or cutting a log to a certain size and then just kind of positioning it, wedging it in so it's more functional. If you're interested in learning more about that, I could talk about strategic wood addition a real long time, but if you're interested, just do a Google search for Vermont Strategic Wood Addition Handbook and you can learn a lot more. I will talk about it a little bit more later. But so we did that. We started adding wood to streams, and we also wanted to be faithful with our science and study it. So what we did was we picked 9 pairs of control and treatment sites, and we used electrofishing. That's what we're doing in the picture, to sample brook trout at these sites 2 years before we added wood. And then we added wood to everything but the control sites. And then we sampled again for 4 more years to see, did we have an effect on brook trout? And we sure did. So here's, this is showing the mean brook trout biomass. So that's basically, it's incorporating the size and the number of fish. And the yellow is the treatment sites, the green is the control sites. And the brook trout biomass tripled on average in the places where we added wood. And even by the end of that original study, we had more brook trout in our control sites, even though we didn't add wood there. And I think that was just some of the spillover benefit because we just had so much better habitat, more food probably being captured. And so we just had more fish overall. But now I'll just go through some of the details as to why we saw that response. As I said earlier, fish need cover, and the wood that we added provided cover. Here's an example of a brook trout that is hiding under one of the logs that we added. There was actually a couple of brook trout when this was in October, and there was actually a couple fish there. They were spawning, and most of them scooted away, but this one stayed behind for some reason and let me get video and get some photos of it. The wood that we added is retaining organic material, which remember, that's the base of the food web. So we're capturing leaves. You know, if a stream doesn't have wood in it or boulders or something to capture those leaves, they're just going to go right downstream and they're basically lost from the system. But by adding this wood, adding the roughness to the channel, it's capturing that organic material, keeping it up here where we want to feed our insects and fish, rather than it going downstream where we already have too many nutrients. Forming pools in some cases, you know, this is really important habitat for brook trout, especially in the winter. And some of our wood is forming pools. It's retaining sediment. As you can, especially you see the picture on the right, there's a gravel and cobble bar forming on the downstream side of that wood. That's sediment accumulating there, which helps to narrow the channel, which is important because that gives less exposure to hot air in the summer. So in theory, helping keeps things a little bit cooler and does a little bit of scouring, makes it a little bit deeper there, which is good habitat for fish. And also along with retaining sediment, we're retaining phosphorus, because we know that phosphorus in streams is mostly adhered to the fine sediment. So by retaining that sediment up here, we're retaining phosphorus, which, we're working in the headwaters where we don't have a phosphorus problem. If anything, we have maybe too little of it up there. Whereas downstream, Lake Champlain, for example, there's too much phosphorus. So this wood that we're adding is helping to retain some of that phosphorus up here, which is a water quality benefit downstream. And while we're on nutrients, I'll just talk about nitrogen as well. Nitrogen's a little bit different. It moves dissolved in the water. But the way nitrogen is treated in a stream is in backwater areas, but as it goes through the soil, or the technical term is the hyporheic zone. So there's the stream, the water that's flowing through the stream, but then there's also water flowing through the ground right under the stream. And that's the hyporheic zone. And that's where those nitrates are getting transformed basically into nitrogen gas. And so that can go back into the atmosphere. So wood actually helps initiate and foster some of that exchange of getting that water to go down into the hyporheic zone. So wood benefits that process as well. And nitrogen, we're concerned about phosphorus on the Champlain side, but on the Connecticut River side, we're concerned about nitrogen because there's too much nitrogen in the Long Island Sound. So this wood, while we don't have numbers on it, at least in theory, it's benefiting nutrient processing as well. Wood also, yeah. So I mean, I talked about the benefits to fish, talked about nutrients. Wood also in these headwater streams especially benefits all of us downstream. We are sensitive to flooding, as we should be, with the last couple of decades and the flooding we've experienced here. But one of the things, having a lot of wood in these headwater streams is beneficial because those streams become less efficient at just pushing all that water downstream. If you have wood, if you have roughness in those headwater streams, it helps to slow that flow, maybe pushing it into the forest, letting it soak in a little bit, dropping out sediment, dropping out wood, rather than it just rushing downstream where we all live. And I just want to show some examples from last summer. This is a stream in Walden where we added wood in last June. This picture was taken sometime after the July flood. I can't remember if it was July or August. But I guess first thing to notice, you can see the stumps where these trees came from up on the bank. Notice that wood really didn't move. And that's because these are big trees relative to this channel. Even when the water got high, it was not able to move that wood, at least not move it very far. What it did was it backed up and it went into the forest and it flooded in the forest, which is what we want to happen. But, there's no road here, there's no house. We want the natural flooding process to happen here. And you can see all that fine sediment that settled out as that water came up into the forest, dropped out that sediment. So, hopefully this helped alleviate some problems downstream by causing some flooding up in the forest where nobody lives. Here's another example. This is a different stream. We added wood to this stream in the summer of 2022. But then these pictures were taken after the July floods last July. And so that's a mixture of wood that we added. And then there's a lot of just kind of natural wood that the river picked up from the forest or wherever it got it. And it piled up here. To give some perspective, here's my technician standing next to it. So you can see that water got really high. But the wood that we added, it stayed and it captured a lot of material that river was moving. A lot of natural, all that old rotten looking wood, that's not stuff that we added. That's just stuff that the river was moving. And you can see all that sediment that got deposited on the near bank there. So again, this stream actually flows down to 102, Route 102. And I think, I'm happy that we were able to accumulate this stuff up here rather than it going downstream and possibly threatening it's a bridge down there. But yeah, it could be a culvert on another stream. Another example from the same stream, a little bit downstream, but again, you can see where that wood in the stream forced the river into the floodplain there, dropping out sediment, dropping out wood. And then one more example from the same stream, where we got some flooding there on the far bank, where the stream went into the woods and dropped out material that it was carrying. Again, a good thing to drop it out here rather than down where we all live, and we already have too much sediment and too much water during the floods. Okay, so now I've talked about the importance of wood in streams for fish, for nutrients, and for flood purposes. So now I'm just going to kind of bring it back to you folks as landowners and what you can be doing to benefit aquatic habitats, specifically streams that might flow through your property. So one is to protect riparian forests. Let those trees grow on our stream banks. Don't be harvesting them. Let's get protect our forests, especially along our stream banks. And if there aren't forests there, then maybe do some planting. Get some forest back on those stream banks. Leave wood in the stream. Now, there are some cases where it's appropriate to pull out wood if it's threatening your property or a culvert, and you'd want to consult your local river management engineer about that. But we get calls, we get emails from people that see wood in a stream there's no threat from it, and they just think it's ugly or it's bad, or I don't know, bad for fish habitat. It's actually great for fish habitat. So if it's not threatening anything, let's leave it there. That not only for fish habitat, but for the other benefits I mentioned. All right. In some cases, it may be appropriate to add wood to your stream. This isn't it's not right for every situation, but it might be something to consider. Why would we want to add wood? Well, think about what Vermont would have been like back before Europeans were here. We had these big old growth forests, with big trees that were just dying of natural causes, and they'd fall and you'd have dead wood laying on the forest floor. And sometimes that wood would fall into a stream. And you can see some of these pictures here from some old growth forests, how big those pieces of wood were that were in our streams. And there would have been a lot more wood than we have today in most of our streams. And that's because when we came over here, the first people that came were the beaver trappers. And so they did a good job of getting a lot of the beavers out of the streams, which it sounds like there was a lot more beaver dams in our streams originally. But then after the beaver trappers, we came over and we started clearing the land so we could farm. You can see that picture there of Poultney, Vermont. A lot of Vermont was just pasture at one time. So those trees are gone. And at the same time, we're, building dams and we're floating logs, doing log drives. And if you're going to do log drives, you don't want anything in the river that's going to catch your logs. So you pull the wood out, you pull the boulders out. So we really have made a mess of our streams. And we continue to do that today. We like to put the stream in straight lines because that works for us. We like to build our roads right next to them. And we basically want to clean them out in a lot of cases. Human nature, I guess, to clean things out because we just want to get that water moving as quickly as we can and get it away from us. So we have a long history of getting wood out of our streams. Most likely any stream around you probably does not have as much wood in it as it did in the past. But again, I'll say adding wood is not appropriate everywhere. There's lots of things to consider. Just one of them I put here, it's not appropriate for every size and slope of stream, looking at stream power. if this is something that you're interested in, I'm happy to talk to you about it. You feel free to reach out to me. I will say that NRCS actually provides some funding for this kind of thing on some properties. So there's funding available for landowners to have this kind of work done. The limiting factor really is there's not many contractors able to do it right now. But if it's something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me or NRCS. Um, all right. Another thing landowners can do is eliminate barriers to fish movement. Um, and specifically, that's usually culverts. And just kind of a diagram here. This is what a stream might have looked like before a culvert was there. The fish can move wherever they want. The stream is transporting sediment and water just fine. And then we come along and build a road or a driveway for maybe some of you. And it ends up being too small. The culvert ends up being too small. And you get sediment accumulating on the upstream side. It creates a scour pool on the downstream side, and it might block movement of aquatic organisms that want to get upstream. It also, not only is it bad for aquatic organisms, but just for uh, long-term maintenance. On the upstream side of culverts, during high flow events, if the culvert's too small, you get these kind of eddies going on the upstream side. And you can see there's that brown thing is supposed to be a log that's moving downstream. And apparently in a typical river, they usually just kind of go parallel to the flow. But then when they hit that eddy on the upstream side of the culvert, they get turned and then they get pushed right up against your culvert. And if you get enough of that happening, you have this. This is a culvert that got washed out in the July flood last year because it was too small. You can see how big the stream wanted to be in that area, but the culvert was too small. It apparently got plugged and then it just eroded around that. And when that erosion happens, you get a bunch more sediment in the stream that you don't want. And then that road gets closed and then you have to pay the money to repair it. And again, replacing culverts is another thing that I believe the NRCS has some funding for. So if that's something you're interested in, reach out to them. Reducing nutrient input is another thing landowners can do. And then the last thing is just let people fish. One of the great things about Vermont is we have a lot of outdoors that we can enjoy. And because we enjoy the outdoors, it helps us to care about them more. And so facilitating people to access the outdoors and enjoy it is something that landowners can do potentially to help people to care more and hopefully be better stewards. All right. So yeah, with that, hopefully I convinced you that fish grow on trees, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Just let me figure little things out. All right, we had a couple questions that are in the chat, and if anybody has any more, go ahead and type them into the chat. So the first question, a little bit about that nutrient reduction. What place do farm drainages play in fisheries? I'm thinking of those little streams that come out of the drained corn and hay fields and end up in the river.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they're sort of wondering, are they having a big impact, or how can we reduce that impact?
Yeah, I guess it's probably somewhat case specific, but in general, I'm thinking a lot of those kind of ditch type things were put in place because maybe the land was too wet to farm originally. And so they would dig a ditch basically to help get the water off of the land, make it quicker to get the water off the land so that that land dries out and you can farm on it. So that is a bad thing for a couple reasons. It's good for farming. I guess we had to do that. But if we reverse that, say one thing that can be done and has been done in places is put in a ditch plug, basically. So maybe you don't fill the whole ditch in, but you plug that ditch. Well, what happens then is you reverse that process of just getting the water off quickly. So you basically kind of get that land to be a little bit more wet, more of like a wetland. And that's actually beneficial for fish for a couple of reasons, because trout, as we talked about, need cold water. And when you have water that kind of is allowed to soak in to the soil, gets into the groundwater, it stays cool and hopefully comes back out to the river as cold water, rather than you get rain, it comes right off the field into the ditch, goes right out. You're not basically replenishing that groundwater or that cold water that could come in. So that's why it's, could affect fish, can also affect our flood resiliency. So anytime that we are doing something, whether it's a farm field or a parking lot or anything, where we are making it harder for the water to soak in, for the rain to soak in, we're moving it quicker into our rivers, we're making flooding worse. So yeah.
Okay, great. Another attendee would like to ask the question. Says, you're doing the work of beavers, right? Wouldn't introducing them be cheaper than paying people to do it?
It's yeah, so okay, so that's a good question. What we're doing is a little bit different. So there are things, structures that are called beaver dam analogs. So out west, especially, this is a big thing they're doing out in the western US, where they are actually, humans are actually building something like a beaver dam. What we're doing is really, it's a fair bit different. But the other thing, so one reason that humans are actually doing beaver dam analogs out west, and in some places they're actually doing it here in Vermont, is because the habitat's not always suitable for beavers. So just as an example, we we're adding this wood to the stream. Sometimes we actually do get beavers that will kind of adopt our structure, and they'll come in, and now what beavers are usually working with to build their dams is smaller pieces that they really kind of fit together, and they'll pack it in with sediment and rocks, which we aren't taking the time to do. But almost all the time, they will eventually abandon that site. And that's because the site wasn't appropriate. It didn't have the wood that they wanted, or there was something about it that they didn't like. So, just introducing beavers isn't going to result in beaver dams everywhere, just because our current conditions aren't ideal for them in every place. Whereas what we can do this in a lot of different places, and do it pretty quickly.
Great, thank you so much. Todd wants to know, how much money is brought into Vermont for fishing each year on average?
Oh, I don't know. I I guess I should know that number off the top of my head. It's yeah. I don't really want to guess. What I can say without giving an actual number value is it's a good return on investment. We know I do know that my department, and my department can't take credit for all the great fishing. I know that, but by based on there's been comparisons on the budget of our department compared to the amount of money that fishing generates in the economy, and it's a really good return on investment. So I'll just say that.
Great. Julie's wondering if you could talk about what smaller vegetation might also be helpful to help counteract flooding. She assumes that deep-rooted plants would be most helpful. Are there other issues to consider?
Um, yeah. So, was was that talking about vegetation in the stream, or I?
I think kind of more along the sides, and to
Yeah,
slow and
yeah,
spread it a little before it gets to the stream is the way I would interpret the question. Julie, if you
yeah,
have clarification, go ahead and type it in.
yeah. Well, I guess if she wants to type something else, I'll just speak while we see. But um, yeah, I mean, anything that's done in the forest, even to basically allow basically prevent water from just kind of rushing off the land quickly. Anything that can slow flow on the surface, plants that might take up water. Yeah, anything that we can do to help water to slow down and sink in, whether it's in the forest or in the stream itself, or even perennial channels or whatever it is, or I mean temporary channels, anything like that that can slow the transfer of that rain to the rivers down where we live can help with floods. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we often talk about in the coverage training that we want to slow the water. There's three things we want to do with water. We want to slow it, we want to spread it, and we want to sink it. So if it's going down your trails and it's like a river down your trails, you want to create a water bar to get it off into the woods. If you leave some trees down, it's going to slow it down, leave the vegetation grow. So it's again, and then by the time it reaches the stream, it's really coming from underneath or at a slow trickle. So it creates less erosion. It's a great way. The three S's.
Mhm.
Todd points out, he said he knows it was 1 year, it was $71 million that fishing brought in on that return on investment. So that is a pretty good return on investment. That's really great. So is there plans this summer to be doing some more of this, adding to streams? What are we looking at for the future a little bit here?
Yeah, so my department in particular, this summer we plan on working in the Waits River watershed on the Groton State Forest. I guess I didn't mention, I should have ended with, I often end with a slide that shows what we've accomplished. And to date, we've done strategic wood addition work on, I think, 62 miles of stream. And we know that we expect basically at least a doubling of the brook trout in those streams. So that's a pretty significant a number of brook trout increased in the state. Of course, it's mostly been in the Northeast. We've really focused in the Northeast because we've got a lot of public land up here. At this point, we are trying to transition to basically facilitate this on private lands. So NRCS, as I said, is providing funds for it. Really, our bottleneck right now is that we don't have enough contractors available to do this kind of work. So that's really what we're trying to get at. But that's the future is more, guiding, facilitating this on private lands where it's appropriate. I really can't stress that enough that this isn't the right tool for every situation. It's not appropriate for everywhere. But there's probably a lot of places where it can be done and a lot of places on private lands. And that's where we want to get from here.
That's great. That's great. With 78% of the land in Vermont in private ownership, that's our target audience too, Judd, is to really get those landowners active on their properties and improving those using their own resources from NRCS, meeting with other partners like Audubon Vermont and their Forest for the Birds. So there's lots of opportunities to do good things on your land to improve habitat for fish and wildlife, which I still think fish are wildlife. So I think that's great. It doesn't look like we have any question. Oh, there was one last question that just popped in. How do contractors get connected with you to learn this process?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, usually they hear about this somehow and then they've reached out to me. In fact, actually, one of the nice things from our coverts training, the coverts training last, what was that, September, I guess it was. I had someone there that reached out to me and said he was interested in learning. So I basically took him out, showed him what we're doing. And I volunteered to, if he does get a project, finds a project that he can do, I'll come out and spend time with him in the woods to help train him one-on-one to get him started. So I'm very keen on anybody that wants to learn this. We've done one workshop in the past where it was pretty well attended. We had a lot of forestry and logger type people come. Didn't really result in anybody actually kind of moving ahead with it. we may have something like that in the future, but in the meantime, I'm happy to just work with people one-on-one and help them get started.
Great, great. Well, I did put your email in the chat, so people are welcome to contact you for more information, or if they were interested in a presentation for their local group, or if they know any contractors that they would like to send your way to learn this process. We thank you for your time today, Judd. We hope everybody enjoyed the presentation, and we look forward to hosting more lunch and learns for you during the coming year, and seeing more fish in our streams. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all.